Groundhog Day in Times Square. Part 1. The best seat in the house. For Leo, Times Square was a living, breathing organism, and he was a single, insignificant cell in its bloodstream. For 5 years, he'd been Leo the living statue, painted head to toe in silver, standing perfectly still on a small pedestal near the red steps. He knew its rhythms by heart, the tidal surge of the 8 a.m. commuters, the lazy ebb of the mid-afternoon tourists, the frantic, neon-drenched pulse of the night. He knew the specific squeak of the NR line elevator, the scent of overpriced pretzels and diesel fumes, the way the rain felt on his silver-painted skin. It was a grinding, monotonous existence. But it was his grind. The day it happened started with a bad omen. A businessman, too engrossed in his phone, had slammed into Leo's pedestal, spilling his $7 coffee onto Leo's boots. Instead of an apology, the man had snarled, "Watch where you're standing, you freak," before vanishing into the crowd. It was a small, familiar indignity, but today it felt like a crack in the world's facade. The first real sign was the sirens. Not the usual one or two, but a chorus. A dissonant symphony that grew from a background hum to a deafening wail converging from every direction. Then the crowd's murmur shifted. The easy, distracted flow of people tightened, coagulated. Phones were held aloft, not to take selfies with the naked cowboy, but to capture something happening downtown. Leo, frozen in his pose, saw it on the massive NASDAQ screen, a shaky newsfeed showing smoke and running figures. The Chiron read, "Mass casualty event in financial district. Panic in Times Square is a geometric progression. It starts with a single person running, then 10, then 100. A single, coherent scream is a novelty. 1,000 are a weapon. The organism was having a seizure. Leo broke character. He jumped off his pedestal, his silver makeup now a bizarre costume in a real-life tragedy. He was swept up in the current of bodies, a piece of flotsam in a human tsunami. He saw a woman fall, her hand outstretched, and then she was gone, swallowed by the stampede. He saw a child separated from his parents, his cry a silent, open-mouthed bubble in the roar. A hand grabbed his arm, yanking him sideways. It was Old Man Henderson, who ran the gimmicky INY souvenir shack where Leo stored his gear. Henderson's face was ashen. "In here, you idiot," he yelled, pulling Leo through the shack's narrow door and slamming it shut, throwing a heavy bolt. The sound of the riot outside became a muffled, terrifying roar. Henderson's shop was a claustrophobic cave of cheap t-shirts, snow globes, and plastic statues of liberty. But it had one unparalleled feature. A wall of monitors, fed by a hacked feed from the square's own security and advertising cameras. Henderson, a former electronics technician, had built himself his own private command center to watch the world go by. "What the hell is happening?" Leo gasped, wiping silver paint from his eyes. Henderson just pointed a trembling finger at the screens. The view was godlike, omnipotent, and utterly horrifying. From a dozen different angles, they watched the heart of New York tear itself apart. The crowd was no longer a single entity. It was a battlefield. And moving through it, like sharks through a bait ball, were the infected. Their movements were wrong, a stiff-limbed, relentless lurch that could explode into terrifying speed. They didn't fight. They fed. Leo watched, paralyzed, as a scene played out on the screen linked to the camera above the TKTS booth. A young couple, backs against the glass, fought off a man in a business suit whose jaw seemed to be hanging by a thread. The fight was short, brutal, and hopeless. Leo's own hands, still silver, pressed against the cool glass of the monitor as if he could reach through and pull them to safety. A loud bang shook the metal shutters of the shop. Something was outside, pounding. Henderson fumbled under the counter and brought out a small, snub-nosed revolver. His eyes met Leo's, wide with a fear that was decades older than today's chaos. Another bang, and the shutter dented inward. "The back," Henderson whispered. "There's a stockroom. Go." Leo hesitated, his eyes glued to the screens, where a new horror was unfolding near the Disney store. "Go!" Henderson screamed, leveling the gun not at Leo but at the shuddering shutter. Leo scrambled through the bead curtain into the tiny windowless stockroom. He heard the front shutter groan, then the sharp, impossibly loud crack of the revolver. Once, twice. A guttural roar. A sound of breaking glass and a wet, final thud. Then, silence. Leo sat in the dark, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. He was alone. He was trapped. And through the bead curtain, the wall of monitors continued to play the end of the world in high definition. He was a spectator, with the best seat in the house for the annihilation of everything he knew. The silver paint on his skin felt like a shroud. Part 2. The Curator of Catastrophe. The first few days were a cycle of terror, thirst, and a gnawing, obsessive voyeurism. Leo's world shrank to the dimensions of the souvenir shack. 10 feet by 15. The front was a no-go zone. The smell from the other side of the bead curtain told him all he needed to know about Henderson's fate and what might still be lurking in the shop. He'd barricaded the stockroom door with boxes of Burroughs t-shirts and FDNY hoodies. His salvation and his curse were the monitors. The power in Times Square was, miraculously, still on, fed by a complex grid of backups and generators, all running on automated systems for the sacred purpose of keeping the ads lit. The screens glowed, an eternal, garish daylight in his prison. He became a scholar of the apocalypse. He learned the patterns. The infected were mostly nocturnal, or perhaps they just preferred the cover of the perpetual artificial twilight. They were drawn to sound and movement. He watched a group of them spend an entire day methodically trying to break into the M&M's world, their efforts ceasing only when a military helicopter buzzed the square, drawing them away like flies to rotting meat. He knew the faces of the other survivors. He didn't know their names, so he gave them his own. There was Suit, a man who had barricaded himself in the ticket booth of a Broadway theater. Backpack, a young woman who moved between the awnings of various chain restaurants, her knapsack stuffed with supplies. And the family, a group of 4 who had taken over the second-floor observation deck of the Hard Rock Cafe, using the tables to create a formidable fortress. His own existence was a pitiful parody of life. His food was whatever Henderson had stashed away. A jar of pickles, a bag of stale bagels, a case of energy drinks. Water came from a small sink in the corner. He slept fitfully on a bed of unsold I Love NY pillows. The glow of the screens playing across his closed eyelids. The worst part was the helplessness. He was a god with no power. He saw Backpack scouting a route to a shattered pharmacy one afternoon. From his aerial view, Leo could see 2 infected lying in wait in the shadow of a tour bus. He screamed at the monitor, a raw, useless sound that echoed in his tiny room. He watched, his fist in his mouth, as she walked right into the ambush. She fought. She was fast, but one of them grabbed her ankle. The last he saw of her was her being dragged under the bus. He vomited into his sink, the silver paint flaking off his face and mixing with the bile. That's when the idea came to him. A desperate, insane idea. If he couldn't intervene, maybe he could communicate. Henderson's control panel was a mess of wires and switches, but Leo was a quick study. He found the controls for the smaller, programmable LED signs that dotted the square, the ones that usually flashed halal food or bus tour. He couldn't control the massive jumbotrons, but he could hijack these. His first attempt was for Suit, who was planning a nighttime run to a water fountain. Leo, watching a thermal camera feed, saw 3 heat signatures lurking near the fountain. With trembling fingers, he typed a message on the sign directly across from the theater. 3 by fountain, don't go. He saw Suit freeze in the ticket booth window, his face a pale oval staring at the sign. The man retreated. He was safe. For now. A spark, tiny and fragile, ignited in Leo's chest. He wasn't just a witness. He was a guardian angel. A terrified, trapped, silver-painted guardian angel. He started using the cameras to map safe routes, to point out caches of untouched food, to warn of gathering hordes. He was the silent conductor of a survival symphony, his baton a keyboard, his orchestra the few remaining souls in his digital kingdom. He was fighting back, not with a weapon, but with the very infrastructure of the world that had enslaved him. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent years being ignored in this square. Now he was its secret, disembodied god. Part 3. The final broadcast. Leo's reign as the ghost of Times Square lasted for weeks. He became leaner, harder. The silver paint had long since worn off, leaving a pale, gaunt man who spoke only to his monitors. His messages to the survivors became more sophisticated. He used multiple signs to create arrows, spelled out simple words, even used a countdown timer on a discount electronics store sign to coordinate a supply run for the family. He knew their routines, their struggles, their small victories. He celebrated when Suit managed to snag a case of bottled water. He grieved when one of the family, a young boy, fell sick with a fever and didn't recover. He watched the man, the father, he presumed, carry the small, still body down to the street at dawn, laying him gently behind a row of planters in a makeshift grave. Leo cried that day, silent, aching sobs for a boy he'd never met. The balance was fragile. The number of infected in the square seemed to be growing, as if the chaos of the city was slowly draining into its central plaza. His food was running low. The energy drinks were gone, and the constant adrenaline was leaching the strength from his bones. The end began with the tanks. He saw them on the military channel he'd managed to patch into a column of Abrams tanks and National Guard Humvees pushing up Broadway, clearing a path. A rescue. A real, honest-to-God rescue. Hope, a feeling so foreign it was painful, surged through him. He frantically typed messages on every sign he controlled. "Help coming, Broadway, stay ready." He saw the survivors in their fortifications stir with new life. Suit waved from his window. The family started packing their meager belongings. But the military's progress was slow, methodical. And the noise. The roar of the tank's engines and the occasional burst of machine gun fire was a dinner bell for every infected thing in Midtown. They poured into the square from the side streets, a converging river of madness, flooding the one place Leo was trying to save. The soldiers reached the southern edge of the square near the Father Duffy statue. They formed a perimeter, but the horde was too dense, too relentless. Leo watched in horror as the line was breached. A soldier was pulled from his vehicle. The chaos was absolute. The rescue force was being overwhelmed. He saw Suit make a run for it, bursting from his theater, sprinting towards the tanks. He was halfway there when a pack of infected spilled out of the McDonald's and cut him off. Leo pounded on his keyboard, flashing a warning on a sign right above Suit's head, but it was too late. They took him down in the shadow of a tank that was now itself being swarmed. It was a massacre. The military retreat was called. The remaining Humvees and tanks began to pull back, leaving the square to the victors. The rescue had failed. It had only made things worse. Leo slumped in Henderson's chair, defeated. He had front-row seats to the final act. The family was now completely surrounded in the Hard Rock Cafe. The infected were pounding on the doors, climbing the facade. He looked at his control panel. Then he looked at the main screen, the one connected to the massive Reuters ticker that wrapped around one Times Square. It was the biggest megaphone in the world. He had never dared touch it. The system was a fortress. But Henderson, in his paranoia and genius, had left a back door. A final, desperate option. With tears streaming down his face, Leo began to type. He wasn't typing a warning. He wasn't typing a route. He was typing a eulogy. The words, in stark 10-foot-tall white letters, began to scroll across the black screen, dominating the entire square. I see you. I am Leo. I was the silver statue. I am sorry I could not save you. You are not forgotten. Your names are... He didn't know their names, so he used his own. Suit, backpack, the family. You fought, you mattered. I was with you. He saw the family on the rooftop. They had stopped trying to barricade the door. They were standing together, watching the message scroll past. The father had his arms around the mother and their remaining child. They were looking not at the horror below, but at the words in the sky. The infected, confused by the sudden silent light, paused their assault for a moment, looking up at the giant scrolling text. It was the most beautiful, most terrible thing Leo had ever seen. His own life, reduced to this single, futile, magnificent act of witness. He had spent his career pretending to be a statue. Now, in the end, he had finally created something real. He typed one final message, a message for no one and for everyone, for the city and for the silent, watching world. New York was here. He let the message scroll over and over. Then he stood up. His food was gone. His water was almost out. The shack wouldn't hold forever. He walked to the stockroom door and began to move the boxes of t-shirts. He was done watching. The final broadcast was over. It was time to step out of the wings and join the play, whatever its final act might be. The silver was gone. Only the man remained.